Hey guys, Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen here, leading the movement for movement and bringing you another edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training. Before I get started, please definitely subscribe and share this video with anybody in the autism or neurodivergent space who has even the slightest inkling that fitness programs would be their go-to for enhancing life skills that really matter, improving quality of life through strength and fitness. That's what we're all about, and I'm going to give you some information in this Tuesday training that is going to help you decide when it is appropriate to step in and support our athletes from a physical perspective with each exercise, because, of course, as we know, or may not know, but this is something that we bring up on a regular basis in autism fitness programming, is the fact that many of our neurodivergent life skill athletes are going to have strength and motor skill deficits that we need to assess and that we need to address in order to give them the best possible outcomes, i.e. creating a training effect, meaning that the exercises that we're doing actually have some type of beneficial outcome, developing strength and stamina and stability and motor planning, because there is a point at which that exercise is going to be more or less effective, and all of that is going to depend on the technique and the capability of that athlete in performing that exercise. Now, as I mentioned earlier, because so many of our neurodivergent athletes exhibit motor skill inhibition or strength deficits, it's not as though we can just take one of our foundational exercises like a squat or an overhead press or a push-up and say, here, do this, because the athlete is often likely not going to be able to do that at a high level of capability, what we call standard. So when an individual can perform an exercise, again, that squat, that overhead press, that push-up, that cable row, independently, with high quality technique, with a full range of motion, with control throughout each repetition, we call that standard. However, many of our athletes are going to exhibit capabilities that are below standard right now. This is all right if we address it appropriately. So how do we address it? There are two different ways that we address standard performance. And I call it substandard because that's what it is. It is not the fault of that individual, but it is something that we need to meet the needs of if we are going to progress that individual through the exercise safely and effectively. So just like you wouldn't have someone who is just starting out in weight training squatting 300 pounds, we are not going to start our athletes out with too much weight, but also not enough of a support system in order for them to perform the exercise correctly. Right? So our two different ways are going to be modifications and also prompts. So a modification is a simpler variation of that exercise, and this is going to be exercise dependent. And then a prompt is going to be an additional cue or support that we provide the athlete ourselves. So let's talk about modifications. Modifications are going to vary depending on the exercise. And I've done numerous videos on this channel about how we modify different exercises. With a squat, for example, we have most of our athletes starting out squatting to a low or even a high box if we're seeing that they don't yet have the hip strength and stability to squat low with full range of motion beyond, below 90 degrees to the ground, even if it's just for a few reps. In other exercises, for example, the push-up, we have our athletes do a push-up with their chest and hands on a box or on a bench and their knees on the floor, so that we're taking away from the full body weight that they would need to press up and then control down in the eccentric. With a band row, for example, we might use less weight in that band row, and we may position the athlete in a circle marker so that they have a visual spatial representation for where they need to be. So all of these are different modifications that we have, and then we can get into cues and prompts. And there's certainly some overlap between the two. Typically with a modification, because it's something that's going to be environmental, meaning that it's going to be in the setup for the athlete, we don't need to make some type of intervention. We don't really need to get ourselves physically involved, actively involved in the athlete performing that exercise. However, then there are cases in which the athlete doesn't have sufficient motor planning in order to complete that exercise, even at a modified level. And this is where we're stepping in with our prompts and our cues. So what is a prompt? A prompt is a little extra guidance mechanism that we use for that athlete in order for them to sustain that safe and stable performance of that exercise. These, similar to modifications, are going to be exercise dependent. However, they are also going to be individual dependent. What do I mean by that? As soon as we are providing some type of physical guidance for an athlete, we have to have consent, either direct, explicit, or complied. Direct and explicit are one thing, but or implied from that athlete. Some athletes are not going to be okay if we are doing a hand over hand or a hand over wrist prompt, so we want to respect that athlete as a person and also respect their space as well. So instead of stepping in and saying, okay, your elbow is going to go here and your hand is going to go here, and moving the athlete around, which there are several other issues with, we want to make sure that the athlete feels safe, feels comfortable, and feels in control of the situation as well. The other thing about that is physical prompts and physical guidance are very difficult to fade. So if you are implementing, for example, which can be okay and can be effective, an elbow prompt to help the athlete raise their arms up overhead during a press, you need to have a plan for fading back or removing that prompt, because we don't want to stay there forever and ever. And every single time that athlete does the overhead press, now we have to step in and do that that elbow prompt. It gets arduous, not only for the athlete, but for us as the instructor as well, because now we're thinking, well, we have to do the overhead press with this athlete, so I have to step in and I have to help them with the elbow prompt. It creates a lot of unnecessary issues if we are over prompting. Similar to over coaching, we don't want to provide too much effort in having the athlete supported. Just enough so that the athlete can be successful with the exercise. So the other thing with prompts and cues is we need to have a hierarchy of these. So I was just speaking about a physical prompt. We use that with very few exercises. There are really two exercises where we're going to use some type of physical guidance. Number one is going to be that overhead press, where we might do a light elbow tap in order to support the athlete raising their arms up overhead. And the other one is our band or cable row. So oftentimes if an athlete is doing a band row, they're going way too quickly out and then in the eccentric, and then they're pulling back and they may not have a full grip on the band and they might be leaning back. So additional physical support in the way of a physical prompt or guidance is going to be effective many of these times. I want to let the athlete know first that, hey, I'm just going to put my hand over your knuckles or in the band here, or even better, I'm just going to hold on to the strap on the band handles, and now I can support the athlete doing that band row slowly with proper motor control, and I may provide a slight support to that athlete's upper back so that they're not leaning all the way towards falling. Not that they're going to fall necessarily, but they're not holding down their trunk and they're not stable in that position. We may see rooting issues there where the feet are coming up off the floor. So all of these things we can avoid by doing the proper prompt. We just don't want to over prompt, and we want to make sure that we have a plan for fading that prompt back. How do we do that? Well, there are a couple different ways to fade a prompt back. So I may start by just physically guiding or prompting the first couple of repetitions. So it might be first 5 repetitions are going to be prompted, and then once the athlete is started, so that motor is already running, now the athlete is performing the exercise with much better quality of movement, so I can step back and the athlete can perform that exercise much more independently. One of the important things to note about prompts and cues is that this is not a 100% linear process for all athletes. So you may have some sets of an exercise where the athlete starts out and they're doing 3, 4, 5 really good repetitions, and then the quality of the movement starts to falter a little bit, so we have to step in and use a visual prompt first. So we may, unless there is a safety issue, we may not just jump in with a physically guided cue or prompt. We may actually just provide a visual prompt up and then down slow, maybe with some verbiage there as well. And that helps the athlete retrack, recalibrate, and restart with the exercise with much better form as well. So when we are talking about prompts and cues, we want to use them first to greatest effectiveness for that exercise and for that athlete. We need the athlete's consent, explicit or implied, in order to provide a physical prompt. We don't really need explicit consent to do a visual prompt for the athlete or a demonstration, because that's just a motor imitation on their part. The other type of prompt or cue we can use is a verbal one, but we have to be really careful about this, because then we're venturing into the jungles of overcoaching, and that means over-explaining an exercise to an athlete, which is never going to be effective. So we want to be very concise, very clear, very direct with our cues. So I might say, if I'm providing a mirror prompt for that athlete, I might also say arms all the way up and down slow. But I'm not going to add anything to that. I want to be as clear and as short as possible with that cue, because again, I want to be able to fade or remove myself from that situation and coach where I need to coach, but I don't want to have to provide any more prompting or cueing or intervention than I have to in order for that athlete to be successful. Why is this so important? Because ultimately, we want our athletes to be independent with these exercises, to be as strong and as stable and have as best movement or motor quality performance as possible. In order to do that, we do have to remove ourselves, not entirely from the situation. You know, we want to be within 2 arms lengths or so, but we ultimately want that athlete to be independent with that exercise. In order to do that, there's a gradient scale moving backwards. Okay, so we're going from this physically guided prompt back to this mirror prompt, maybe a slight verbal prompt. And then, as I mentioned earlier, it's not always 100% linear process. So that might mean that every once in a while, I'm going to need to step in with that visual prompt or with that verbal cue. You know what? That's coaching. That's just what it is. It happens in the neurotypical athlete or client realm. It's going to happen a lot in the neurodivergent athlete or client realm. So it may be the case that with any athlete, during a 45 or 55-minute session, there's always going to be a time when we are providing an additional cue, providing some additional support, because the reality is that's our job if we're doing our job right as coaches supporting our neurodivergent athletes. So I hope this has been illuminating in a way to demonstrate some of the differences and some of the interactions between a modification or modified version of an exercise and a prompt or cue. The prompts or cues can be done with physical guidance. That's the one that we want to least rely on, but sometimes have to, particularly with those band rows and overhead presses. Then we have our mirror prompting, where we're demonstrating the exercise as the athlete is performing it, or some part of that exercise while the athlete is performing it, because it gives them a visual representation of what they need to be doing. And then finally, we can have a verbal prompt, which we want to keep short and clear so that the athlete understands, and so that it doesn't become a complete conversation back and forth on how to do the exercise. Sometimes the mirror prompt can stand alone and be completely effective and successful. And sometimes you need to add the verbal prompt as well. Depends on the athlete, depends on the exercise. It all depends, but it's not just random. We have a strategic a way of integrating these different practices. And that is what you get by becoming an Autism Fitness Certified Pro. The Autism Fitness Pro certification is available worldwide. Anywhere where you are, you can take the certification. It is a combination of self-paced online course, and then you meet me or one of our master level pros for your full day in-person or virtual practical, where you get the hands-on, brains-on, feet-on training that you and your athletes deserve. Take the guesswork out of your programming, out of your athlete support, and become an Autism Fitness Certified Pro. You can learn more at autismfitness.com. And I'd love to know if this video has been helpful for you. Leave that in the comments below. And of course, if there's a topic you'd like me to cover in a future edition of Autism Fitness Tuesday training, leave that in the comments below. Also, I want to know what you want to know. I'm Autism Fitness founder Eric Chessen, leading the movement for movement. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate you, and I appreciate you looking out for the well-being and quality of life of the neurodivergent individuals that you serve.